Hey everyone, it's Audie. This is The Assignment. And where were you when Artemis II touched down?
Integrity splashdown, sending post-landing command now.
Yes. Ike, welcome home. Christina, welcome home. Yes.
It may be one of those stories in the latest chapter of Space. And the stories of space, they evoke a lot of things. There's joy, there's inspiration, there's fear. Frankly, there's just like embrace in the face of this very scary news cycle. It's like a throwback to a simpler time somehow. Of course, once you dig into it, you realize those times weren't that simple. But my guest today is astrophysicist Hakeem Oluseyi. He knows everything there is to know about space. He used to work at NASA, and he's going to help me parse through all of the complicated feelings we have in this new era of space exploration. Stay with us. So I watched the touchdown of Artemis
Yes.
II, gathered the kids,
Yeah.
brought them into the living room, had it on the big screen, and I'm not going to lie,
Yeah.
I was scared. I
Yeah.
was really scared
Yeah.
because when I was 7, when I was my
Yeah.
children's age, the Challenger
Exactly.
disaster, okay?
Right.
Where there had been a teacher in space program, so
Yeah.
all the little kiddies had been told to gather around,
Mhm.
live feed to the classrooms. But then
Right.
when I was in college, there was the Columbia,
Right.
and that disaster was on reentry, right? Am I
That's right.
remembering that right?
Yeah.
That was
You're
in
mhm.
2003.
Yeah, I was in my early 20s for Challenger and in my early 30s for Columbia. And subsequent to that, I had a career as a space researcher. And I also am aware of, like Astro E experiment blowing up on the launch pad. So I am always thinking about the safety of the people that are on board these giant rockets. I am holding my breath at every takeoff and every reentry. So in this mission for me on reentry, if you look at the video, you'll see that one of the 3 parachutes opened up a bit later than the others. And I wasn't sure it was going to open fully. And that really had me on the edge of my seat. And then once it fully deployed, that's when I finally gave that sigh of relief, was filled with that sense of elation, and couldn't stop smiling for, 2 or 3 days.
That's when my kids were jumping on the couch. There was a
Yeah.
lot of like, they were ecstatic, they were so happy, and I was happy for them. And it was a reminder of it felt like a good moment to talk about
Mm.
why space travel,
Yes.
real space travel kind of
Mm.
draws this out of us. And
Right.
why this
Yeah.
one in particular, the Artemis II, like kind of captured something.
Mhm.
And first I want to say that unlike the 1960s, back then, getting
Yeah.
to the moon, it was important, and it was also politically important because it was this
Right.
like other battleground, right? It wasn't just
Yeah.
about space exploration, it was about beating other countries, of course the
Right.
Russians, to getting there. And then for a
Right.
while, frankly, it seemed like it was between the US private sector versus the US
Right.
public sector. I mean,
Yes.
I have to assume just about everyone is working for private sector space.
All of the above. I know I know both. And here's the thing to understand is that, I was in the government public sector working at NASA headquarters. And there is a law that the public sector is not allowed to compete with the private sector. So both the public sector and the private sector have a role. So the public sector does what only the public sector can do, right? The SLS, the Space Launch System, is a massive investment, a government size investment. And when you talk about exploring the outer solar system, it's the exact same thing. It requires the government. So the government is at the frontier and the edge. And so it's like the difference between basic science and engineering. The scientists discover the new ways that the universe works, and then the engineers take advantage of it through their technologies. And in the very same way, the federal government pushes the limit, pushes the edge, and then they're followed by these commercial interests.
So that
who,
helps me
yeah,
understand, because then that's why like the SpaceX's and the Blue Origins and stuff like that,
right,
they're making satellites, they're they're offering launches, and then there's space tourism, this world of like
Right.
whatever, suborbital. I don't know. We're getting into
Yeah.
the stuff that I barely know. But what you're saying is there's a reason for that. Like the
There's
stuff
a
we
reason
know
for
how
that.
to do, we're letting the private sector pretty much do. But the stuff we
Exactly.
really want to do, we
Yeah.
still are paying for that as taxpayers.
Exactly. And what you see is happening with the Artemis mission now is we're creating a new space infrastructure that is going to create a new economy. They want to get this to the level of a launch every 6 months, right? Right now we're doing a launch, every few years.
My lungs cannot handle that.
Yeah.
Am I to be freaked out every 6 months? What are you saying?
Well, if technology start off really dangerous and over time they get better. They don't become accident free ever. And sometimes you have to, not sometimes, virtually all the time, you have to have a bit of tolerance. We still fly in airplanes. We still ride on cars. We still ride on trains. We still ride on ships. And every year those have accidents. Space has this incredibly low tolerance for accidents, right? The number of space, you can't, when was the last death due to space flight, right? You got to think hard about that. But understand that this is a pathway, and the government is establishing an infrastructure that, as much as the internet created new economies and the smartphone created new economies, this new space endeavor of our nation will create a new economy.
I want to touch on something you just said about the accidents are still rare, right? Like compared to other
Right.
things. But I
Yes.
feel like when something goes wrong with a space mission, it's not just
Yeah.
the deaths, it's the death of possibility. And there's
Right.
something about space exploration that we all feel is like fundamentally at its core a hope driven endeavor.
Love that. Yes.
And I don't know if the billionaire thing has kind of changed that, because once you see
Yeah.
like Katy Perry doing it, you're like, like what was this for? That was for the
Yeah.
highest bidder, right? That doesn't feel as
Right.
exciting. But
Right.
can you talk about that? That like, I don't know any other science, even as important as they all are, that have that kind of layer of pressure on them that you see in like pop culture, in the movies and things like that.
Right. Yeah. The thing about this space endeavor is that it's incredibly inspirational and aspirational, and it's incredibly visible, right? So if there are people that are on the cutting edge of, say, boring tunnels or deep sea exploration, unless something goes catastrophic or it's an individual that is good at bringing attention to themselves, like James Cameron, right, going down in the submersible down to the Titanic, you don't hear about it. But with
Right.
space, it's different, right? It's very visible. And because of that, there was a plan for the Hubble Space Telescope originally that it would be captured by a space shuttle, put into its cargo bay, brought back down to Earth, and placed into the Smithsonian. But after the shuttle accidents, you can't risk human lives on doing something that's that dangerous. And I was at the meeting in Washington, D.C. many years ago when we were having these discussions on what to do. And a particular scientist brought up the fact that, look, this thing deorbits on its own and kills one person. It is a major disaster for the space agency and for space because of that visibility. But that same person could have walked out of their house, gotten into their car, and they have a much higher, orders of magnitude higher probability of getting into a car accident. But we don't think of it the same way. So it is a matter of perception, visibility, framing, and
it's like a different risk
yeah.
proposition on, is it
Absolutely.
worth it, whatever the it is, right?
Right.
Because so many things are brought to us from space exploration, so many technologies.
Yeah.
But I was just thinking, like, when you look at the movies, right, there's like a run of movies, I feel like in the 90s, maybe the aughts, what is time, where mainly people leave the planet to like shoot down asteroids.
Right.
And then maybe people are in space fighting off aliens that they didn't realize they were bringing back home. And it's basically rocket ship as haunted house. Like, there are all these
rocket
ways
ship
that
as
we,
haunted house.
you know what I mean? That's what I
love
consider the alien films.
Yeah.
Shout out to Ridley Scott. Like, they're basically
Yeah.
a haunted house, but with female body horror. And
Right. Yeah.
and we project our fears as much as our hopes.
Right. Yes, we do. We project our fears and our hopes into this realm, and it's interesting because I remember sitting at my grandfather's knee and he watched a lot of Westerns. And I remember the popularity of Westerns. And now, the adventure is space. What a big difference. But
Which
what we
we also
see,
call the Wild West, right? Like whenever we want to talk about
yeah,
unfettered ambition and
that's right.
grand ideas, we say it's the Wild West.
Right. And, there's that era of the age of exploration on the high seas, right? In the 19th and 18th centuries that humans look at. But these are the stories that we tell. And the people that give their lives, they become heroes, right? They're heroic figures. And the people that undertake this, that they have to be incredibly courageous. And I think that is why we find it so inspirational. Courageous people doing daring things in dangerous situations. And the result is revealing new knowledge, breaking new ground, and creating a future for future generations that those people themselves never get to see.
After the break, Hakeem tells me what he has learned from pondering the vastness of the universe. What would you tell the version of you that had doubts, right? In the era when people, especially AI, I've been thinking like, oh, we're so excited to get these photos back. When we're in the age of AI, are people going to believe them? What would you tell the version of you that really has had doubts, about science?
Well, what happened to that version of me is that I got to actually know people who do it, right? And I got to actually gain some understanding about things that I didn't know that I didn't know. And I grew up in a 1970s and 80s deep south and found myself at age 24 in the San Francisco Bay Area, very different population of people. And a lot of those people, based on their group, I had opinions about them that weren't the most positive. And it had nothing to do with reality. It had to do with narratives, right? From the culture I was in. And so we all want to feel special. So, when I got there, I was at home and I was hearing, oh, the rich people are like this. And then I go there and I'm at Stanford University, lead environment. I'm hearing, oh, the poor people are like this. And they're both completely wrong, right? They're both the people completely wrong because people are people and most people are good people in my experience, right? I've been around the nation, around the world. I've known people, I hang out with billionaires one day, I'm in the hood the next, and another time I'm in the, in the plains of Kenya hanging out with the Samburu tribesmen, right? And people are people. And when you have these negative thoughts about groups, you haven't known enough people. That's what that means.
I noticed that even the astronauts from the Artemis talked about humanity.
Ultimately, we will always choose Earth. We will always choose each other.
It wasn't like just about the US or US ingenuity or that kind of thing. And to me, kind of making a real point in this moment when, the US in particular is at war.
Yeah. And when you do this sort of work, where you see the planet as a whole, you see humans as a species on a planet, representing, like in rap, they say, I'm going to rep my hood, right? Well, for many of us, our hood is our planet and our species. And I remember politically, there was someone who's called themselves a citizen of the world. And they take a lot of flack, right, from the nationalist elements in our nation. And I think that's a mistake. I do, we know what the aspiration is because it shows up in our science fiction of the future where we're beyond scarcity, we're beyond discrimination, right? We're one human family working together. I hope we can achieve that someday. We're not there yet, but these astronauts are doing their part to push forward that perspective.
Yeah.
And that hope, right? Because I think that it's a shame that we don't get out of us what I'm not going to call it wasted humanity, but we're not at a point where everyone gets to decide how they're going to live their life and they're well informed, right? A lot of us act out who the world tells us what we are and who we are.
One of the astronauts, she said that someone asked her kind of what struck her, looking back. And she said, and this is really fascinating. She said it was really the absence around us, the darkness around Earth.
Yeah.
And she was
Yeah.
saying it really drove home the idea that we're all together in this boat, so to speak.
Yeah.
And that there's, at least for now, just the darkness. And I hadn't heard it put that way. I've heard it as, oh, we're all together, we're on Earth.
Right.
But I hadn't heard someone say, if you really look around, there is nothing there.
Right.
And we are in it together.
Yeah. Yeah. And chances are we're not going to find any others. And that's absolutely right. We are in it.
You're going to get all the UFO people mad, but continue.
Absolutely. I get them mad all the time. In fact, online, they're like, he's CIA. He's part of the cover up. And I'm like, me? Like, bro, you need to sit down with me and have a chat if you think I'm CIA.
You're not holding out to find anyone else. So it's like really making good with what we've got.
The universe is a lonely place because it's so darn big. And that's the thing that people, if you don't really take years to ingest and understand till you get to the point like, I reached eventually where I could see the sky in 3D when you know the distances to the objects you're looking at, their sizes. So, you have an intuition built in your mind that if I know how big something is, and I know how, I know by looking at how big it appears to be, how far away it really is, right? And then you see it at its real size. Like if you see a human being that's really far away, when I was younger, people used to play this game. I'm going to squish you, right? Because you look so small, a person at a distance, I'm going to squish them. But, in your mind, you see that person's true size. So if you know the distance to the moon and its true size, and you look up at the night sky and see it, you're like, whoa, that thing is massive, right? That thing is huge. The same way with the planets, seeing Jupiter in the night sky, knowing it's 10 times bigger than the Earth, or the sun, knowing it's 100 times bigger, and the distance of 93 million miles, right? You get that sense of like, whoa. And almost no one has that perspective on this planet, right? You got to be some expert nerd who's been doing it for years to develop that in your mind. But once you do, you realize that the universe is an incredibly lonely place.
You can't unsee it.
And here we are, hanging out in the blackness of space, orbiting this star, and even that statement, hanging in the blackness of space. The amount of time I've spent just pondering that and what does that mean to be in the, like for us, something being buoyant in the atmosphere or floating on the ocean, it gives you a perspective of a medium and something in it. But space isn't the same, it's strange, and I tell you, I understand how people go mad.
Why do you think this is resonating for the rest of us?
Oh yeah, that's what I mean.
Don't know the things like what is it that this moment, this launch, this reentry, like culturally is grabbing our attention?
Well, there are a lot of cultural trendsetters. If you go back in the day, right, Carl Sagan was a revelation, right? Oh, a science communicator. And within professional circles, people at the time say he was punished for being that. Then you have this era where you have just a few, the Neil Tyson, Michio Kaku, maybe Brian Cox, right? But now you're in an era where every graduate student is a science communicator, right? Every student of journalism is an independent journalist. So many people who appreciate this and are able to share their passion online has now provided food. There was a time in my early 20s where I felt like I had read everything there was to read about, physics and space and, weird science. And when you're a consumer of this stuff, there's never enough content. And now all these people can feed that attention and feed that curiosity. So the passion is spread much further through the population. It might still be a small percentage of people that are paying close attention, but you don't, it's like being a casual observer of the NFL or the NBA. Someone in your family watches it, so you know the names, right? And so it's the same thing going on, I think, now with space, because among the sciences, it tends to be the most inspirational and attention-getting.
We're in this moment where you have this private sector guy who's now the head of NASA.
Mm-hmm.
And forever, I heard we were going to Mars. Right. And everything was about Mars.
Yeah.
And now here we are, and the moon's back in vogue.
Right.
And NASA's back, baby.
Yeah.
So help me understand, what's the mission and what should we be listening to going forward?
The mission changes with administrations, to be frank, right? But this has been a long-lasting effort. But, if you go back in time to the 90s, there have been administrations, George W. Bush, we're going to the moon, right? And it just takes time for it to all shake out. It's you can't predict what direction the government is going to go in with the new administration. For the most part, there is a cooperation with the past sometimes, but then you have these moments where the direction changes. But I think that we are invested to a point now where this humans in space moment will continue forward. I think we
so
will.
right now it's just about
achieve our
us getting
goals.
ourselves in space, not us sending robots to Mars. Like
Yeah,
you're saying people are back and the moon is back.
people are back. People are back, and the moon is back, and Mars and asteroids are the next step after this moon endeavor gets established in a stable way. And also, there's a lot going on in low Earth orbit. You have companies like Planet Labs, SpaceX, or Elon Musk's Starlink. So there's a lot happening in Earth orbit, and there's a lot that's going to be happening on the moon. And it's all about establishing an infrastructure. Just like America required railroads and highways, space needs to build its railroads and highways.
And their cops. I have to say, we did not even, and we won't, get into the Space Force, which is a branch of the military, that someone's got to populate at some point.
It's one of those things,
That's
it's one
on
of
the
those
Space
things.
Force. What?
Well, here's what I'm saying. Back in the 80s, America illustrated its ability to shoot down a satellite, right? The Chinese have illustrated their ability to blind and shoot down satellites. So even though the militarization of space was something that was on the hush, it was quietly occurring, right? So it's not just the inspiration and aspiration. There are geopolitical consequences to this space endeavor. And so what does that mean? You want to get the high ground first.
It sounds like, and I guess this is a good thing, all these years after the end of the shuttle program, we are at the start of a new chapter.
Absolutely. We are at the start of a new chapter. We are pushing a new frontier, and this is just the beginning of what's to come.
Well, thank you so much for talking with us.
You.
We really appreciate it. Best of luck.
Thank you so much for having me. It's an honor.